والصلاة والسلام على من لا نبي بعد نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه ومن اقتفى أثره واستنى بسنته إلى يوم الدين. Inshallah, we'll continue with reading from the book known as the Musannaf of Abi Bakr, Abdullah ibn Muhammad ibn Abi Shayba, rahimahullah ta'ala, who died in the year 235 after the Hijrah. And we're in the section that deals with tahara, the section that deals with purification. And we've reached the statement of the author, rahimahullah ta'ala, من كان إذا بال لم يمس ذكره بالماء. This chapter is regarding those who, when they would urinate, they would not rinse off their penis with water. What is this chapter referring to? We all know that it is necessary that after we relieve ourselves or take advantage of the facilities when we handle or answer the call of nature, that it is necessary for us to clean ourselves. As a Muslim, it is necessary for us to clean ourselves after responding to the call of nature. And so what are the different methods of cleaning oneself? We know that there is al-istinja. Al-istinja is when an individual uses water to remove any of the filth that might be left behind, whether it be on his front organ or his rear organ. The use of water is what is known as al-istinja. Another method of cleaning oneself is to wipe, whether that wiping, as was classically done, was with small stones or a rag, or nowadays we use paper and tissue paper. That act of wiping after one answers the call of nature, that act of wiping is known as al-istijmar. Al-istijmar. And so this chapter is going to be regarding those who would suffice themselves with wiping and would not use water. Is it necessary to use water? Is it not necessary to use water? Is it better to always use water or to combine between the two? Or is it better to just wipe? These are all issues that the scholars have discussed, and there is some disagreement in them, right? Likewise, when an individual wipes, has the area actually become clean, or is that just an allowance for them to be able to go and pray thereafter if they wipe correctly? But cleanliness is not obtained except through actually washing. This is a position. And so these chapters that are about to come will discuss some of those topics. What were the Salaf's view regarding wiping, using water, combining between the two, which one was more preferable, and like this. And so that's what the meaning of this chapter title is. Man kana idha bal lam yamussa dhakarahu bil ma. Those who, when they would urinate, they would not touch any water, they would not rinse their penises off with water. The verifier, Sheikh Ash-Shithri, hafidhahullah ta'ala, he said in the footnotes regarding this topic, he said, Al-Jumhur wa minhum al-a'immatul arba'a ala at-takhyiri bayna al-istijmari wal-istinja fala yata'ayyanu ahaduhuma. He said that the majority of the scholars, and from them are the four Imams, Abu Hanifa, Malik, Shafi'i, and Ahmed. He said the majority of the scholars, and from them are the four Imams, hold the view that an individual has the option to either do al-istijmar, i.e. to either just wipe, or al-istinja, or to either just suffice themselves with using water without wiping. He says, "What فَلَا يَتَعَيَّنُ أَحَدُهُمَا." So neither one of them is mandatory in and of itself. The obligation is that an individual clean themselves in whichever method one uses. Then according to Ash-Shithri, according to the Jumhur, then whatever method one selects, it is valid. Let's look and see what some of the statements of the Salaf were in this regard. This is those or should I say, this is the opinion or the statements of those who used to not see it necessary to use water. He says, حدثنا أبو الأحوص عن أبي إسحاق عن يسار بن نمير عن يسار بن نمير يسار ibn Numair or Namir. I don't know. Yasar ibn Numair with a dhamma. And Yasar ibn Numair قال كان عمر إذا بال مسح ذكره بحائط أو بحجر ولم يمسه ماء. He says that Abu al-Ahwas narrated to us on the authority of Abi Ishaq, on the authority of Yasar ibn Numair, who said that Umar radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, whenever he would urinate, he would wipe his penis off on the wall or with a rock, with a hajar. And he would not use water to rinse it off. Meaning he would suffice himself with wiping and he wouldn't use anything else to clean himself off, right? If he was urinating up against a wall, for example, he might use the dust in the wall itself to dry off and clean off his penis, akramakumullah. Or he might use a stone to just wipe it off and make sure that the area had the najasa and he removed from it. Now, he says, حدثنا أبو معاوية عن الأعمش عن إبراهيم أو مالك بن الحارث قال مر سعد برجل يغسل ما باله فقال لم تخلطوا في دينكم ما ليس منه. He said that Abu Muawiyah narrated to us on the authority of Al-A'mash, on the authority of Ibrahim or Malik ibn al-Harith, one of the two. He said that Sa'ad passed by a man who was washing off his urinary, his penis. He was washing off the places where the urine had gotten on his penis. فقال, yani Sa'ad said to this individual, لِمَ تُخَلِّتُ فِي دِينِكُمْ مَا لَيْسَ مِنْ. Why are you all mixing your religion with things that aren't from it? Why are you all introducing into your religion, mixing up with your religion, things that aren't part of your religion? As if he was criticizing him, I say, for washing those areas where the urine got, instructing him that wiping it would have been sufficient, right? And the reason behind this is because some of the Sahaba, as we'll see soon probably, they had a more of an extreme view, like Abu Musa al-Ash'ari, radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, he used to urinate in a jar. And when he was asked about it, he said, because Banu Israel, if they ever got urine on them, and the narration is unclear whether it was on their skin or on their clothing, they would have to cut it off with a scissor, right? So some of them say if they got it on their clothing, they would have to cut that portion of their clothing off, while others say no, the extremity or the extremeness of Bani Israel is that if they got it on their skin, they would cut that piece of their skin off. فَهَكَذَا كَانَ أَشْيَاءً فِي دِينِهِمْ. This is what used to be part of their religion. And so he used to pee in a jar to avoid getting any of the splashback. And when Hudhayfa heard about this, he said, Ya layta sahibukum, right? If it was only the case, I wish your companion didn't go to such extremes. And he talked about how the Prophet ﷺ once urinated standing up in the courtyard of a group of people where the trash was piled. The point of it is so for this reason, some of the Salaf, they didn't take it as extreme as others, while others had a very extreme view about, maintaining their cleanliness as it related to not getting any traces of urine on them. And so like this, you can understand the narration here where Sa'ad passes by a man who's washing off where the traces of urine might have gotten on him. And Sa'd is telling him, Lima tukhallitu fi dinikum ma laysa min. Why are you mixing up with your religion something that isn't from it? Right? Why are you entering the the extremism of Bani Israel, for example, into your religion? Now, Abu Bakr, he says, حدثنا أبو أسامة عن عبد الله بن المستورد قال رآني مجمع بن يزيد وأنا أغسل ذكري فقال ألم تكن تنفضت حين بلت قلت بلى قال حسبك. He says that Abu Usama narrated to us on the authority of Abdullah ibn al-Mustawrid, who said that Majma' ibn Yazid saw me and I was rinsing off my penis. And so he said to me, Alam takun tanaffadta hina bult. And from what I'm understanding is he's saying, didn't you shake off when you urinated? But let's double check that word. Nafadha, tanaffadha. نفض مصدر نفضت الثوب والشجر وغير أنفضه إذا حركته. Now, تنفض, to shake off. تحركت. Now, so Majma' ibn Yazid, he said to Abdullah ibn al-Mustawrid, didn't you shake off after you urinated? He said, of course. He said, then that's enough. And so that's an interesting statement right there, right? When it comes to urinating, some of the Salaf, they wouldn't see that it was necessary to even wipe. But instead, and this is, obvious, akramakumullah, for the males who hear this, sometimes you urinate and it doesn't get anywhere. It's only the small amount that is on the tip of the head, akramakumullah. And that urine that is still there can be gotten done with or done away with by simply shaking off. And so this is Majma' ibn Yazid telling Abdullah ibn al-Mustawrid that you need to wash after you after you do number one, after you urinate, but simply shaking off is good enough. He says, حدثنا عبدة بن سليمان and هشام بن عروة أنه قال كان أبي لا يغسل مباله يتوضأ ولا يمس ماء. He says that Abdullah ibn Sulaiman narrated to us on the authority of Hisham, on the authority of Urwa, who said that my father, he used to not wash the places where the urine went, right? Mabala. It could be the penis itself, or it can be like the traces of the urine, but here it's most likely the penis itself. He used to not wash off his mabal and his urinary device, his penis. And he said, and this is the statement of Hisham about his father, يَتَوَضَّأُ وَلَا يَمُسُّ مَاءً. He would make wudu and he would not touch any water, meaning he would not run any water on his penis after using the toilet. And this is an important issue because there are, from the madhahib, from the schools of thought, those that consider doing istinja a prerequisite of wudu. So they say that if you don't rinse off or wipe off properly, then your wudu is not valid, right? Obviously, using the toilet, answering the call of nature, it nullifies your wudu. But they say that if you don't perform istinja, istijmar, then your wudu is not valid. So they consider it to be a prerequisite or shart of a valid wudu. But here you see that Urwa ibn al-Zubayr from the Kibar al-Tabi'in and the Fuqaha al-Sab'ah, he used to urinate. He would not wash off or rinse off, and he would make a wudu after that. So that's an interesting or an important action from the Salaf regarding this topic. Abu Bakr, he says, حدثنا وكيع عن سفيان عن ليث عن عطاء أن ابن الزبير رأى رجلا يغسل ذكره فقال ألا يغسل أسته. SubhanAllah. He says that Waki' narrated to us on the authority of Sufyan, on the authority of Layth, on the authority of Ata, that Ibn al-Zubayr, right? And Ibn al-Zubayr here is more likely Abdullah ibn al-Zubayr, not Urwa. The Khalifa, the Sahabi, Abdullah ibn al-Zubayr, one of the four Abadila. Ata, and it's Ata ibn Rabah, most likely. He says that Ibn al-Zubayr, he saw a man washing his penis. And so he said to him, Ala yaghsil, or he said about him, Ala yaghsilu ustah, in a way of criticizing him. Why doesn't he wash his butthole? Why doesn't he wash his asshole? Akramakumullah, right? Ala yaghsilu ustah. Why doesn't he wash his butthole? And this statement is a form of criticism. One, because when you talk about istinja, especially after doing number two, the Salaf, a lot of them would prefer wiping either first or all together, because this protects the hand from getting affected by the filth that one expels when defecating. But another thing is that when we're talking about washing, for example, the backside, you don't wash the hole. You don't get water inside of the body and inside of the hole. That's takalluf. This is an act of, pig-headedness and ridiculousness. Instead, the part that they would wash would be the surrounding area on the outside, right? The outside of the part that's the outer layer, right? And they wouldn't go inside of themselves, akramakumullah. And this leads to an issue that some of them mention, which is if the najasa doesn't go past its normal area, if it doesn't go out of its normal location, then it has no effect. And what does this mean? For example, right now in your body, there is urine. Right now in your body, there is feces. But that urine and that feces that you are carrying right now in your body, it has no effect on your acts of worship. Why? Because it hasn't transgressed, or it hasn't gone past its natural location. So it doesn't nullify your wudu, and it does not need to be washed until it goes past its natural location. And so like this, when we talk about urine, for example, a lot of times a person might urinate and there's no urine left on the outside part of his penis. And likewise, when we talk about defecating, a person doesn't have to go inside of themselves to clean. And so here, when Abdullah bin Zubair is seeing this individual wash his penis off with the assumption that there's no need to wash the penis off because there's no filth there that requires a washing, he said this statement of criticism to him, this statement of criticism to that individual or about that individual, Ala yaghsilu usta. Why doesn't he wash inside of his butthole, right? Obviously, whoever did that would be ridiculous. And so likewise, he's criticizing the person who is washing themselves when there's no need to do so because the urine didn't spread past its natural location, right? An individual urinates and they cut the stream off, or the stream ends. And when they, look at themselves, there's no trickling or drippage, or none of their body was affected. Then according to this view, there's nothing needed to be washed. And the point of istinja is to remove the filth. And so if there's no filth there to be removed, then there's no need to do anything according to this view. And so like this, he equated the one who was washing himself off with no need to do so, like the one who washes inside of their butthole. Akramakumullah. He says, حدثنا عبد الأعلى أن يونس أن الحسن في رجل بال ونسي أن يغسل ذكره قال أجزأ ذلك عنه. He says that Abdul A'la narrated to us on the authority of Yunus, on the authority of Al-Hasan, yani Hasan al-Basri, regarding a man who urinates and forgets to wash off his penis, Hassan al-Basri, he said, it's sufficient for him. It's okay. He doesn't have to go back and do anything. Meaning, if he made wudu after that, it's fine. If he prayed salat after that, no problem. He doesn't have to redo anything or go back and fix anything. And like we say, that's especially the case normally with urination, because a lot of times urinating doesn't leave anything, especially if you urinate standing up. And we have to remember that, as we'll come across, I'm sure, the out way of urinating for a man is to urinate standing up, right? Yes, the Prophet ﷺ urinated sitting down at times, but the normal way of urinating is to stand up for a man. This is the normal way of a man urinating. That being the case, if an individual is standing up, a lot of times, if it's just urine, there won't be anything left on him because there won't be any splashback. The gravity will pull the urine away from his body. And when he's done, it's a clean surface. And so that is how these statements should be understood, when there's no traces of anything left to be cleaned. And so for that reason, Hassan al-Basri, he said it's sufficient for him. If you forgot to rinse it off, it's no problem. He says, and like I say, obviously this is an opinion, and we're going to talk about maybe some of the disagreement in this. Those who say that al-istinja or al-istijmar is an act of worship, regardless if there is any filth or not, and it wasn't legislated to get rid of the filth, but instead as a pure act of worship that we don't know the wisdom behind. And so therefore it has to be done regardless, especially if you consider it to be a condition for the salat. All of that, perhaps we'll get to it. But the point of it is that this just shows us a different perspective on how the Salaf were, how we can sometimes be a little extreme in our religion based on the fundamentals that we learn. And it's not meant to have us eradicate or to do away with the foundations that we were taught and, that we have been acting with and we've been built up with up until this time. Because we're not saying you don't have to wash or you shouldn't wash yourself after you clean or wipe after you use the facilities. But it's just to show you that did the Salaf act the same way? Some of us might be extreme. And you see people extreme at times, right? I remember I used to be a janitor in the masjid. And being a janitor in the masjid is a hard job. It's a job that can sometimes make you dislike the Muslims. And I remember, especially from some of our foreign brothers, they would, crouch on the toilet seat with dirty feet and leave the seats dirty because they thought that was the way you should use the toilet, right? Following, erect one leg, erect your right leg and stretch out your left leg, et cetera, et cetera. Or when they would clean themselves with the water, they would leave big puddles and lots of, splash everywhere. And like we see, this is not something that's necessary to go to that extreme that they do, especially when they make it hard on the next person. And anybody who's visited any of the Dawrat al-Miyah or the water closets in different masajid, or especially the bigger masajid, you know what we speak of, where it's something that sometimes you're scared to walk into just because of how wet and, careless people are as it comes to cleaning themselves and things of this nature. So it just shows us that the Salaf were a little bit different in that regard. Now, he says, حدثنا وكيع عن مسعر عن عبيد الله بن القبطية عن ابن الزبير أنه رأى رجلا يغسل عنه أثر الغائط فقال ما كنا نفعله. He says that Waki' narrated to us on the authority of Mis'ar, on the authority of Ubaydullah ibn al-Qibtiyah, on the authority of Ibn al-Zubayr, yani Abdullah ibn al-Zubayr, who saw a man washing the traces of defecation, the traces of feces off of him, right? Individual had a bowel movement, right? He defecated, and there were traces left in between his cheeks that need to be cleaned out. So Ibn Zubair saw this person, right, cleaning himself from those effects of the defecation using water. And he said, Ma kunna naf'al. We didn't used to do that, right? And this is talking about the position of those who say that the best way to clean oneself after defecating is by wiping, and that using water was not the norm, right? The Prophet ﷺ has been documented more often than not, he would wipe. And it's not known that the Prophet ﷺ ever gathered between the two. It's not known that the Prophet ﷺ ever wiped and washed or washed and wiped. He would do one or the other, but more often than not, he would just wipe. And that is what leads some of the scholars to say that wiping, if you have to do it in an order of preference, some of them say that wiping is the first option, to just suffice with wiping. And there's reasonings and justifications they use to preserve water. Washing, a lot of times, depending on how and where you're washing, it can make the area dirty or even make you more dirty, because as it's rinsing off, it can get on you, on your shoes, on your feet, etc. And for that reason, some of them say, no, the best way, the best method is to wash and then wipe. Because if you wash first, you get it off, and then when you wipe, you dry yourself off. Others say, no, the best method is to wipe and then wash, right? So you wipe to get rid of the big filth and the large items, and then you rinse off to get the small things that wiping can't get. And like this, they have various opinions about which one is the best method and which one is more preferable. And as we mentioned in the beginning, it's an open issue, right? There's flexibility in this issue. For example, when they say wipe first and then wash, it's because of how their facilities would be. If you, like we said, if you wash first, it's a possibility that that water can transmit the najasa to other places. Nowadays, for example, a lot of Muslims have in their home bidets. They have those toilets that spray the water, or they have the spray bottle or something like this. And so washing first might be better and then wiping to dry. All of these are just preference issues, but those of them who say that wiping is the better action and the default action, the more preferable action, it's because the Prophet ﷺ would do that the most. And so they see in him an example. لَقَدْ كَانَ لَكُمْ فِي رَسُولِ اللَّهِ أُسْوَةٌ حَسَنَةٌ. And so this is what led Ibn Zubair to criticize that man who was washing out his backside after defecating, to say we didn't used to do that. He wasn't criticizing him in the aspect of it being haram, but he was criticizing it in the aspect that it's something extra that you didn't need to do as much, and what was good enough for the Prophet ﷺ is good enough for us. The next narration, he says, حدثنا أبو أسامة عن عبد الله بن يحيى التوأم عن ابن أبي مليكة عن أمه عن عائشة رضي الله تعالى عنها أنها قالت انطلق النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم يبول فاتبعه عمر بماء فقال ما هذا يا عمر؟ فقال ماء توضأ به فقال ما أمرت كلما بلت أن أتوضأ ولو فعلت لكانت سنة. Now this narration is indirectly connected to the topic. Abu Bakr, he says, حدثنا أبو أسامة and Abdullah bin Yahya at-Tawam. And on the authority of Ibn Abi Mulaika, who narrates on his mother, who narrates on Aisha, radiyallahu ta'ala anha, who said that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam went out to urinate. And so Umar followed him with some water. And so the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, what is this, Umar? Why are you following me with the water? Ma hadha ya Umar? What is this, Umar? And so Umar, he said, it's water, make wudu with it. Right? It's water for you to make wudu with. Faqala, and so the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, I have not been commanded that every time I urinate, I need to make wudu. And if I had did so, then it would have been a sunnah. And so here the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is not making wudu and not maintaining a constant wudu by urinating and not making wudu immediately after. And that is a topic that we'll cover later, al-muhafadha ala al-wudu, maintaining wudu at all times? Is it preferable or not? طيب, the issue is, what does that have to do with this chapter? And the connection is, if the Prophet ﷺ did not have to make wudu, which is an act of worship, using the water, then why do you think he would have to use wudu to rinse his penis off? Instead, it's something that wasn't necessary. And if it was necessary, he would have done so. He would have washed himself off with that water so that the Muslims would know that it's something that is necessary to be done. But the same way that he did not make wudu with that water after finishing urinating is the same way that he did not rinse himself off with that water after urinating. And so that shows us that using the water after urinating is not necessary. And this was the chapter title of the author. Let's take the next chapter, inshallah. It's the opposite side of the coin. It's the contrary opinion. He says, "Man kana yuhibbu an yaghsila dhakarahu wa yaghsila athar al-bawl." This chapter is regarding those who used to love, they found it more preferable that they would wash off their penis and that they would wash off the traces of wherever urine got to. Abu Bakr, he says, حدثنا هشيم ibn Bashir and Ghaylan ibn Abdullah Mawla Bani Makhzum. قال رأيت بن عمر يغسل أثر البول. He says that Hushaym ibn Bashir narrated to us on the authority of Ghaylan ibn Abdullah, the freed slave from Bani Makhzum, who said, I saw Ibn Umar, Abdullah ibn Umar, washing off the traces of urination. Right? He would wash off the places where urine got to. Naam. He says, حدثنا حفص بن غياث and Asim قال رأيت أنسا يغسل أثر البول ورأيت بن سيرين يغسل أثر البول ورأيت النضر بن أنس يغسل أثر البول. He says that Hafs ibn Ghiyath narrated to us on the authority of Asim, who said, I saw Anas ibn Malik, washing off the traces of urine. And I saw Ibn Sirin likewise washing off the traces of urine. And I saw Nadhr ibn Anas. I'm trying to remember, is Nadhr ibn Anas here the brother of Malik ibn Anas? I know Malik had an older brother who was, when he was young, he was known as Nadhr's little brother. And then as he got older, they used to know Nadhr as Anas's big brother. Nadhr ibn Anas ibn Malik. No. The thing is, though, I don't think he has any narrations in Kutub al-Sitta. Musa, another Ibn Anas ibn Malik al-Ansari, Abu Malik al-Basri. Rawa an abihi Anas ibn Malik. So no, this is not Malik ibn Anas's brother, but this is the son of Anas ibn Malik. Another Ibn Anas is the son of Anas ibn Malik. All right, so it's a name that's similar, but not the same person. Another Ibn Anas was the son of Anas ibn Malik, the Sahabi. They say about him, he narrated on his father, as well as Bashir ibn Nahik and Zayd ibn Arqam. They mentioned who narrated from him. Abu Ubaid al-Ajuri, he said about him on the authority of Abi Dawood, كان في من خرج إلى الجماجم قال النسائي ثقة ذكره ابن حبان في الثقات يقال مات قبل أخيه موسى بن أنس ibn Malik. Right, his hadith can be found in all six. Now, so this individual says, I saw Anas ibn Malik washing off the traces of urine. Likewise, I saw Ibn Sirin, Muhammad ibn Sirin, washing off the traces of urine. And he says, and I saw Nadhr ibn Anas, i.e. Anas' son, wiping off the traces of urine. He says, حدثنا وكيع and كهمس and Ibn Buraidah أنه قال ابن عباس أحمد إليكم غسل الإحليل. He says that Waki' narrated to us on the authority of Kahmis. Let's make sure we're pronouncing that right. Kahmis. No, Kahmis. Mark this for next time. Kahmas with a fatha. Kahmas with a fatha. And then he said Al-Ihlil. I want to say Al-Ihlil is the urine hole. If I'm not mistaken, Al-Ihlil is the urine hole. والإحليل والتحليل مخرج البول. Yeah, it's the urine hole. مخرج البول. نعم. He says that Waki' narrated to us on the authority of Kahmas, on the authority of Ibn Buraydah, who said that Ibn Abbas, radiallahu ta'ala anhu, he said, it is more praiseworthy for you all to wash off your urine hole. Right? Similar to the criticism that we mentioned earlier from Ibn Zubair, ala yaksilu usta, why doesn't he wash out his butthole then? Here, Ibn Abbas is saying the contrary. No, it's more praiseworthy for you that you run water on your urine hole, right? Get it in the surrounding area and let the water, it might even go inside of it. It's more praiseworthy for you to rinse off your urine hole. He says, حدثنا وكيع عن عمران ابن حدير أن رجل من بني سعد أنه قال رأيت أبا هريرة رضي الله تعالى عنه بال فغسل ما ها هنالك. He says that Waki' narrated to us on the authority of Imran ibn Hudayr, on the authority of a man from Bani Sa'd, who said that I saw Abu Hurairah urinate and then he washed what was there. He washed his private part. He says حدثنا جرير عن منصور عن إبراهيم أنه قال بال ثم أخذ ماء فأدخل يده في ثيابه فمسح ذكره. He says that Jarir narrated to us on the authority of Mansur, on the authority of Ibrahim, yani Ibrahim al-Nakha'i, who said, yani Mansur said that Ibrahim urinated. And then he took some water, i.e. in his hand, and he put his hand inside of his garment and he rubbed it on his penis, right? So he took some water in his hand and he sprinkled that water that was in his hand and rubbed it on his penis, i.e. to remove the traces of urine. And it could also be said to prevent any feelings of waswasa. The point of all of this, and we have a couple more narrations, but the point of all of this is to show that using water is acceptable. And some of the scholars, they used to deem it preferable and more suitable, like Ibn Abbas. But if an individual doesn't use water and only wipes, then that is sufficient. Like, what about if an individual doesn't wipe at all? If there is nothing there that needs to be wiped and nothing there that needs to be cleaned off, then that is sufficient as well. It's not something that has to be done just for the sake of doing so. But instead, the objective is to clean off the areas that have become filthy. And so water is a very strong tool in cleaning off. It can be used, but wiping is sufficient. طيب, he says, حدثنا وكيع عن شعبة عن عامر بن مرة عن إبراهيم عن الأسود أنه بال ثم أدخل يده في سراويله فغسل ذكره. He says that Waki' narrated to us on the authority of Shu'bah, on the authority of Amr ibn Murrah, on the authority of Ibrahim, and Ibrahim al-Nakha'i, on the authority of Al-Aswad, and Al-Aswad ibn Yazid al-Nakha'i, that Al-Aswad, he urinated, and then he entered his hand into his pants and washed off his penis. Right? He took some water in his hand, entered them in his pants, and washed off his penis like that. He says, حدثنا عبد الرحيم ابن سليمان عن الحسن بن عبيد الله أنه قال كان إبراهيم إذا بال أدخل يده تحت إزاري فمسح ذكره فذكرت ذلك لطلحة فَأَعْجَبَهُ ذَلِكَ. He says that Abdul Rahim ibn Sulaiman narrated to us on the authority of Al-Hasan ibn Ubaidillah, who said that Ibrahim, yani al-Nakha'i, he used to, whenever he would urinate, place his hand under his izar and wipe off his penis. And here the assumption is wipe off his penis with water that was in his hand, as was mentioned in the earlier narration. Al-Hasan ibn Ubaidillah, he says, so I mentioned this to Talha, and he was pleased with that. Yani that was something that delighted him. This action was something that he approved of. And then the last narration, he says, حدثنا وكيع عن العلاء أنه قال رأيت إبراهيم بال فغسل ذكره. He says that Waki' narrated to us on the authority of Al-Ala, who said that I saw Ibrahim urinate and he washed off his penis. And so this is some of the Salaf who used to hold the view that it was better to use water and more praiseworthy for you, like Ibn Abbas said. While on the flip side, we had Sahaba like Umar, radiallahu ta'ala anhu, who criticized them and said, why do you enter into the religion that which is not from it? Or no, that was Sa'd. That was Sa'd. And Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas. But Umar, when he would urinate, he would just use a rock or use the wall to wipe himself off. So in any circumstance, that's the chapter about the view of those who say that using wiping is better or water is better or none of it is necessary if there is no filth that needs to actually be cleaned off. As far as if there is filth that actually needs to be cleaned off, then you have to wipe until you have wiped enough that nothing else but water will clean it. Or if you use water, you have to use enough water till the area reverts back to its usual coarseness and rigidness that it was before that lubricant of urine or excrement stained that location. In any circumstance, the next chapter we'll pick up next time. في الرجل يتوضأ فيخضخض رجليه في الماء. Regarding a man who makes wudu and he does khadkhada. What is that? Let's figure that out right now so we don't have to look it up next time. Khadkhada. I hear it as submerge his legs in water. Instead of just rinsing off, he puts his whole legs in water from al-khawd. But let's see. خضخضت دلوي في الماء. نعم. والخضخضة الأصل من خاض يخوض من خض يخض. Yeah. So it's to submerge, right? خضخضة من الخوض. So the next chapter will be about a man who urinates and then he just submerges his whole lower half in the water. We'll stop at that amount. هذا وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على عبده ورسوله نبينا محمد. You know what? We got a couple of minutes and this chapter only has 2 narrations or 3. So this chapter is about a man who makes wudu. He makes wudu, yatawadda. But instead of rinsing or washing his feet, he just plops them in the water, right? Sometimes it's hard to bend over and actually scrub your feet, or nowadays lift them up to the tub, right, or to the sink to get them in the water. And so if a person just has a bucket of water or something where they can just plop their feet in or submerge their feet, is that good enough for the wudu when they're washing their feet? The author, he says, حدثنا أبو بكر قال حدثنا وكيع عن إبراهيم بن عمر عن سليمان الأحول عن طاووس في رجل توضأ فخضخض رجليه في الماء فقال هذا غير طائل. He says that Abu Bakr narrated to us, who said that, yani Abu Bakr ibn Abi Shaybah, this is the statement of the Rawi, so he's starting over again, mentioning his chain. And so he says that Abu Bakr ibn Abi Shaybah, he said that Waki' narrated to us on the authority of Ibrahim ibn Umar, on the authority of Sulaiman al-Ahwal, on the authority of Tawus, that famous imam from the students of Ibn Abbas. Tawus was asked about a man who makes wudu and just submerges his feet or plops his legs, his feet into the water. And so he said, هذا غير طائل. This is ineffective, right? That's how I understand it. غير طائل it's ineffective. It has nothing under it. It has no benefit behind it. So it would seem that Tawus would be of the view that washing the feet requires the scrubbing. It can't be considered washing until you actually scrub. And this is the opinion of some scholars, that washing isn't considered a wash unless an individual scrubs. The next narration, he says, حدثنا وكيع عن إسرائيل عن جابر رضي الله تعالى عن جابر بن زيد هذا رحمه الله قال سألت عطاء وعامرا وسالما عن الرجل يتوضأ فخضخض رجليه في الماء فقال يجزئه. He says that Waki' narrated to us on the authority of Israel, on the authority of Jabir, who said that I asked Ata, who was a different student of Ibn Abbas, and Amir, and Amir al-Sha'bi, as well as Salim, the son of Abdullah ibn Umar, about a man who makes wudu and submerges his legs in the water. And they all said, yajzi'u, that is good enough for him. He doesn't need to do anything else. He doesn't need to scrub. He doesn't need to go between his toes. If he just submerges the entirety of his foot underneath the water, then that's good enough. The last narration, he says, حدثنا هشيم عن أبي حرة عن الحسن قال إذا خضخض رجليه في الماء فقد أجزأه من الوضوء. He says that Hushaym narrated to us on the authority of Abi Hurra, on the authority of Al-Hasan, who said that if he submerges his legs into the water, then that is sufficient enough for him as during his wudu. That is good enough for him in his wudu. I want to just double check that statement of Tawus, because I don't understand it any other way, غير طائل, other than it's not helpful. But I just want to make sure before I attribute that to Tawus. غير طائل, دون طائل, دون فائدة. Yeah. لا طائل من, لا طائل تحت, لا طائل في, لا فائدة ترجى من, لم يظفر منه بطائل, لم يحقق هدفه. Now, so Tawus would be from those who hold the view that it is not sufficient, while Salim, Amir, Ata, and Al-Hasan al-Basri, they all held the view that it is sufficient. You don't need to actually scrub the body part. You only need to get it wet. And that to them is sufficient as washing. Now we can stop at that amount. The next chapter will be في الرجل يتبلع بالوضوء يتبلغ بالوضوء إبطة, regarding a man who goes so far up his arm in wudu that he gets to his armpit, right? What if somebody goes past the legislated amount when making wudu? Is that something that is good? Is that something that is bad? Who used to do it, right? Is it criticizable, etc.? That will be the chapter that we cover next time, regarding a man who reaches in wudu all the way up to his armpits. نعم. هذا وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على عبده ورسوله نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.